Okay, we've got the little spinny circle going, and you know what that means, everybody. Wendy, hello. It is time for another Money Moves with the Black Swan Money Team. So welcome, everybody. We've got an exciting topic we're going to be talking about today. Most of us, we make decisions based on what? When you look at, investment, things in the past, when you look at your 401k, what helped you decide what to put your money in?
Yeah, rates of return, average rates of return.
Average rates of return, right? That's what we hear. That's what we look at.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm doing great. The 5-year, 10-year, 20-year average rate of return, things like that. But is that really what you should be looking at? Or is it maybe not telling you the truth? So we'll get started here in just a second. Do us a favor, click that little subscribe button down below. Text a friend, share this podcast with a friend, and let them know this video with a friend. Excuse me, I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. And we'll get started in just a few seconds. And we're back, and I love it. Yeah, getting a little ahead of ourselves because we are flipping to a podcast format for 2024. So I'm excited about that. Talked to Wendy. She and I have been working on this in the background. So that was a little preview, if you will, of what's to come. So, but that's not what we're talking about today. What are we talking about today, Wendy?
Rate of return, and is it real?
Rate of return, is it real? I don't know if you got a microphone. It's a little hard to hear you, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the average rate of return. Most of us look at average rate of return when we're deciding what should I get my money into, and also, am I doing good, right? And in my humble opinion, I think it's kind of like a shell game, and I think a lot of people out there in the industry use that shell game to kind of guide you or move you into things that maybe you shouldn't or shouldn't. And don't get me wrong, average rate of return is something to look at, but it's not the end all and be all. I don't know, if you've experienced that or if you've actually looked and things like that. I mean, talk to me, Wendy. Throw some stuff at me. Throw some knowledge down.
Yeah. Well, to me, like looking when people say, "Oh, the S&P does this over this amount of time," like I just thought, or mutual funds do this on average over whatever, right? Like I just assumed that's the way you always look at returns and measure it. And I had no idea until working with Turning Point Group that there was a difference between average rate of return and actual, and how that impact, how much of a difference there can be. Yeah. And so I've always just heard what's the average rate of return. And my eyes have been opened in the last couple of years, really understanding what losses can do to your rates of return, even if the average still looks pretty.
Yeah, I mean, I follow Warren Buffett. That's his number one rule: don't lose money, because once you do, it starts throwing all your numbers off, and those numbers are very misleading, right? And I've got a little bit of a graph here, so I'm gonna hand my technology guru there, so we can kind of look at this stuff. And if you look at average rate of return, right, is it really telling you the truth? And the answer is not really. Don't get me wrong, you still want to look at it, but you shouldn't be basing your decisions solely off of that. And why? Well, let's look at what an actual rate of return, an average rate of return, what is it? What are we talking about when we say average rate of return? Math is numbers. You can get it to basically say whatever you want. That's why you, the viewer, need to educate yourself, and that way you're able to make these decisions from an empowered place, right? From a knowledgeable place. You don't have to know the ins and outs and the details, but you need to know enough to ask the right questions, right? Don't just accept it as blind faith that everything's going to work out. And I apologize, I got this sunny day coming in here, so it's like bright and dim, bright, dim. But is it really telling you the truth about what your investments are going to do or are doing or things like that? And that's really where you start looking at the numbers. So what I've done is I've just taken the S&P returns point to point. Like, what did it do in 2018? What did it do, from January to December 31st, right? What did it do? And I use slick charts. So you see the little source down there. But in 2018, the S&P 500 went down 4.38%. Okay. It went back up 31.49. Woo, killing it, right?
Yeah.
then it went up again another 18%, and then went out, or went up another 28%. So I mean, it's killing it. And then last year we had a little bit of a correction, right? Negative 18%. So it's up and down, and that's part of the challenge. On a side note, with we don't get in and we don't get out, right? When those loss year comes, those traditional advisors are out there, well, you only take a loss if you sell your positions, right? It's the same thing on the gain years. You only get a gain if you sell your positions too, just FYI. But that's not what we're talking about today. So if I look at that, how do I figure my average rate of return? Well, I'm just going to take the numbers there, add them up, and then divide by 5. So when I do that in this case, my average rate of return is 11.22. And some of you are like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought it was 31, 18, 28. Those lost years really take a big hit on your growth, right? That's why some people have said my 401k looks more like a 201 because of those lost years. And Warren Buffett, number one rule, don't ever lose money, right? So you look at that and everybody said, well, 11.22 is still pretty good, right? I like that. I can do that. Just set it and forget it, 11.22. My money's going to be growing at that 11.22 every year, average, right? So what does that look like when we start talking about numbers? Because the reality is, and I'll ask Wendy. Wendy, do you spend a percentage or do you spend actual dollars out of your billfold? A percentage? You're spending the dollars.
Real dollars.
Money. Show me the money. That's what it should be about with everybody, right? Show me the money. So if you look at that, go back and look at that 5-year period. And this is what most people think it looks like, right? Well, I get $100,000, or I start with $100,000. I put it in the S&P 500, right? An index or strategy or whatever the case may be. And that 11.22, the first year, it grows. I like it. I'm growing. My money on average is growing 11.22 a year. So at the end of that 5-year period, based on that average rate of return, I should have about $170,000 plus in my account.
Yeah.
Agree?
I mean, average rate of return. Yeah. You put that average on every year. That should be about right.
Yeah, that's going to get me, pretty dang close. Well, the reality of it is a little bit different. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is where we look at, instead of looking at the average rate of return over 5 years, most people think, okay, it's growing about 11.22% during that 5-year period. That's not reality. Okay. That's why you want to look at the actual rate of return. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Well, we take that same scenario and get real, right? I don't know if you've ever seen David Chappelle, when Getting Real went too far. We're not going to do that today. But looking back at those S&P numbers, okay, 2018 to 2022. So that same $100,000, right? So first year it went down, I lost 95,000. It went up 31. So I had to go up even further, right? Because I thought I got 31%. Well, yeah, you started with a lower amount, so really you only got like 25% on that year. And then, I go up again. I'm up at 148. Okay, so I'm making some moves here. I like that. I'm up to 191. Whoa, wait a minute. I actually have more money in that account. Then the reality hits again. That loss happens. Now you're down to 156. So the reality is, instead of that 170, you only have 156. So when you average that out, instead of 11.22, it's really like 9.42, 9.43 in there. And I kind of backed into those numbers. And this was on the back of a napkin, kind of doing some quick calculations, guys. But pull out Excel, check your numbers or whatever the case may be. But again, instead of 11.22, the real kind of average, if you will, is only about 9.42. That's almost 2% difference. Okay. That's 2% less than you thought. And you figure that 2% annually over 30 years, 35 years,
right,
that adds up to quite a bit. And not only that, we're dealing with gross numbers here. Okay. Gross numbers. Like, you look at, where do most people put their money? Average Jane and Joe out there, where they're putting their money?
401k or mutual funds.
Yeah. 401k, traditional IRA, maybe you're self-employed, you're doing a SEP or something like that. So there's also management fees on top of that, right? Anywhere from 1% to 2%. So, okay, now we're going from 942 to 742, right? There's 12B1 fees. You've also got taxes. Most people are putting all their money in pre-tax. So all of a sudden, you start to see why your 401k really only looks like a 201k. And the big thing about the average rate of return, number one, it's not taking into consideration those lost years. It accounts for it a little bit, but not really. And then it's really not accounting for inflation either. I mean, because the inflation dollars are growing or shrinking over that, that money over that 5-year period too, which that's going to be in most cases. But it's really kind of scary when you start looking at, okay, wait a minute, instead of that 170,000, I'm actually only at, 156,000. And that was just one small little example. I mean, there's a lot of little moving cogs in the wheel, but so many people are tripped up on that average rate of return, right?
Well, I love the example that you first gave me. That was so simple. And I want to share that for people too, to just, I love those numbers. I love that chart because it shows the truth, right?
Yeah.
The average is typically going to look better than the actual, especially when you have those losses.
Yeah.
But you had shared an example with me, like, Wendy, you have $100, I have $100, right?
Mm-hmm.
I put my $100 under the mattress, you invest yours, you get a 50% return. Well, now I have 150, you still have 100.
Yep.
Well, then we get a 50% loss the next year.
Yep.
So average rate of return 0 on both of us. So who has more money? And I was like, we both have the same. Like, no, you don't. Because if you have 150 and then you lose 50, then we're down to 75.
Yeah.
So $100 with a 0% return, average return under a mattress versus in the market, 0% up 50, down 50. You actually have a negative return.
Yeah. And I've used that story for years, right? And it gives a great example of why actual rate of return is what you need to look at versus average. And like I said, average return, it's not an out and out lie, but it's kind of fudging the numbers a little bit. It's not really the whole truth. It's one of those things like, ladies, if you ask your husband, where you're at, well, I was with some friends, just hanging out. Okay, where were you hanging out? Get the details, right? But that average versus actual in that $100 example, I mean, if I'm in a shoebox under my bed, first year 0, second year 0, average rate of return for those 2 years is 0. You're in the market, you go up 50%, down 50% because I'm a market correction, 50 up, 50 down, average rate of return over the 2 years 0. We both have 0%. So technically you think, well, we're going to have the same amount of numbers. And 9 out of 10 people actually answer exactly like you did. Yeah, we have the same amount of money. And then you do the math. Right. This is why we're trying to, with this Money Moves channel, we're trying to empower you, the viewer, to be able to make and look at these very simple kind of calculations and things like that. And it's kind of, oh, well, I never really thought about it that way. We talk about taxes all the time. Most people put their money in pre-tax accounts. So reality, I have a job where I'm making money and I can pay my taxes. Whereas in retirement, I don't have a job. I'm trying to live on that. So I don't have any place to pay taxes. And our tax rate's going to go up or go down by the time you retire. It's just little ways to get people to think about that stuff. But this was one that I've had people reaching out to me. I know you mentioned it a few times on, hey, we really need to kind of do a deep dive on that because it is so important. And that's why you look at from 2000, and this is for you Gen Xers, specifically Generation X, right? If you look at what the market did in our working career, right? 2000 to 2012. 2000 to 2012, that's called the lost decade, even though it's 12 years, right? It's called the lost decade because our money didn't really grow during that entire time. Now, if you're pulling in and out, doing day trading and this, that, and the other, whatever the case may be, I'm not talking to you, the specific, well, I actually made money. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the masses, all of us putting our money in a 401k, listening to it's long-term, don't look at it, set it and forget it. You don't lose until you sell your, blah, 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 all the stuff out there, right? But if you had $100,000 in 2000, that started, it got hit out of the gate. Why? We had Y2K, we had the dot-com bubble, we had 9/11. And so the market was trashed, right? It was a big loss for 3 years, right? And then what did it do? It does what the market does, is start recovering. Okay, so we started going up. 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, you almost had your $100,000 back. And then the banking crisis happened, right? The real estate bubble popped and all the other stuff that happened during that period. Okay, so we lost our money and then it started creeping back. And then about 2011, 2012, we got our $100,000 back. But that was invisible to most people because we're all socking money in our 401k and things like that. And so you're seeing the amounts going up because you're putting cash into it. But if you had that $100,000, and the example I just gave you, this just happened, again, or starting to process again, where we had a major correction last year. 2023, I think, has been overall positive. I don't have the exact amount. And then, 2024, it's like, I don't know, big question mark. A lot of wobbly wheels on the cart right now, so we'll wait and
Yep.
see. But I'm not thinking it's going to be a good year. But I don't have a crystal ball. We'll see what happens. But again, this is why it's so critical. Excuse me. Why it's so critical that you look at what's really going on with your money. Like Wendy said earlier, you're not out there spending percentages. You're spending cash. Your rate of return is not what you're going to live on in retirement. It's the cash that you grew. And so that's why you want to make sure you're looking at, ways to grow your money, but also ways to protect your money. We've talked about it before. There are actually ways to get returns with no loss. And so your actual and average are very closely lined up. Okay. So if you don't know about that, reach out to Wendy, reach out to myself. We'd be more than happy to kind of go into a deep dive on a specific strategy for you, if that's the right thing for you. But what this video is about is really to get you to look at the actual rate of return versus the average rate of return, because the average rate of return may not be telling you the whole truth, right? That's all I've got. Anything to add to that, Wendy?
No, I love it. I've wanted us to do this video for a while, because it's just one of those things that until your eyes are opened, you never pay attention.
You never think about it.
And nobody mainstream is talking about average rate of return isn't really the truth.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's telling you that. So I love this, and I hope that you guys watching have a light bulb moment and think about things a little bit differently. So, and protecting against that loss as much as you can. So.
Yeah, and that's really what this whole show is about. I've said it before, and so I've said it 100 times. I mean, what we're trying to do here with Black Swan Money, the Money Moves. The Black Swan Money is kind of our educational platform. Money Moves is the video for you, the viewer. We're trying to show you how to make more money, right? Side hustles, whatever the case may be, how to save more money, getting your spending plan together and kind of being intentional about your money, telling your money what to do rather than just watching it fade away every month, and then growing it. We want to show you ways to grow your money on any budget. And, just because you're not wealthy doesn't mean you can't build wealth. Okay. And then number 4 is how to protect it from market loss. There are ways to do that. There are a lot of ways to do that. Where you only get growth, never loss. Protect it from taxation. We're coming up on an election year where it's, such and such doesn't pay taxes, blah, blah, blah. That is all a crock. Okay. The IRS would go after them like a pit bull because they want their money. I told you, the IRS spells theirs. They want theirs. But they know how to play the game, right? They know the rules of the game, and that's what we're trying to teach you. So hopefully you got some good stuff out of this. Give us some love. Click that like button down below. Give us a little heart. Share it on your social media. We'd love to hear some comments from you. We're coming up with some ideas on taking questions. We want to do like a Q&A, and maybe if you're on and you have some questions, we'd love to hear your question or an idea for a show. We'll do a deep dive on it in 10, 15 minutes. But other than that, have a great day. Click that subscribe button. And if you want to catch some back episodes, go to blackswanmoney.com. That'll take you to our YouTube channel. We can catch all 122 of our episodes so far. So thanks again, everybody. Wendy, thanks. It was great seeing you. And we'll see you next week